Hey folks, welcome to the channel. I'm excited for you to see my build for the Bowie Challenge. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, that's a build between these YouTube channels to make the best Bowie knife. My build is going to be a takedown, and of course, it's going to be mosaic Damascus. Let's take a look. For my Bowie in the challenge, I'm going to be making it from mosaic Damascus. I'm calling this Snowflake Damascus, and this is going to be the Ice Blue Bowie. Now it's time to weld up the edge of the billet so we can get this in the forge. Many people ask me what's in the can. This is kerosene, and as you put the billet into the forge, the kerosene burns off along with any oxygen that might be between the layers. The key to mosaic Damascus is starting with different thicknesses of your starting steels. Here's a graphic that shows the initial stack that I'm starting with. After the forge weld is complete and all the layers are stuck together, then I start to draw it out and it'll start to look more like this. It's really important to keep the billet very square and plumb at this stage because any kind of distortion is going to affect your pattern later. You'll see what I mean. The next step is to re-square the billet, and for this we're going to use squaring dies. This is another important step where it's easy to get distortion. You got to make sure you have this aligned perfectly in the dies. After we re-square the billet, we're going to rotate it 90 degrees and start to press it down, and that's going to give us our C's. This is the step that actually gave me some problems. I actually had to totally redo the Damascus because I screwed this part up. In this one, I got a little bit of distortion that kind of looks something like this, but it actually ended up working out well, so I'm happy with it. I'm drawing this bar out kind of long and making sure I'm squaring it up well because I'm getting ready for the restack. So I've already cut that bar up into 4, ground the surfaces, re-welded it, and now we're forge welding those layers together. It's going to look something like this. Again, I'm trying to keep the billet nice and square. I need to draw it out a little bit, but then we're going to re-square it. As you can see, mosaic Damascus is pretty complicated. There's not really a way you can do this without a press or a power hammer. We've got our billet looking something like this. Now again, we're going to rotate it 90 degrees and re-square it in the squaring dies. It'll look something like this when we're done. We're going to be cutting this up into 4 pieces, so we need to draw this bar out pretty long, but also keep it very square as we're doing it. I really need to make some kiss blocks for my press, and that's a project I'm going to do in an upcoming Triple T. Okay folks, there's the bar all sliced up into 4. What I decided to do on this one that I don't normally do is I TIG welded the edges on the last billet, and I got a couple of cold shots when the billet compressed and those grooves kind of compressed in, so that's why you see these corners are rounded here because I had to grind some of that off. So there's the pattern, if you can see that. It's not exactly how I intended, because you see this is a little wavy here, It's not a straight line, but that's kind of cool. I kind of like it this way.
Instead of TIG welding the edges, this time I'm using MIG weld. That does introduce some mild steel, and that's why I'm grinding it off here flat so that it doesn't get pressed into the billet. We have this from the last step. Now we're going to 4-way together and get this pattern. I'm using the squaring dice here to put equal pressure on all sides of the billet at the same time. This will give us a good forge weld. Just like the last step, we're going to draw this out into a nice long square bar and get ready to cut it up into 4 and 4-way it again. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting nice crisp edges because I know I need to 4-way this again. We want those bars nice and square.
So here we are getting ready for the final 4-way. This is going to give us our final billet. We've got the pattern on each of these, plus we'll get a pattern in the center. So let's weld it up.
No kerosene or flux needed this time because I've sealed up the billet entirely so no air will get inside. This second to last forge weld will show us what the pattern is going to look like. Kind of. We still need to tile it out, but it's going to look something like this. This is the last forging before I cut it up into tiles, so I need to make sure it's kind of rectangular because when we stretch it out after tiling it, we're going to distort the pattern a little bit and we want it back to square. Here's a little test etch to show you what the pattern looks like.
Ooh, that's pretty.
So remember that pattern is on the end of the billet. So now what I've done is cut it up at 30-degree angles and tiled it out here. Now we're going to forge those back together and that'll give us our final billet. When I welded the tiles together, I used a bunch of sacrificial steel to make sure they stay together. All that's got to get ground off later. This is my least favorite part of doing a tile weld.
So I finally ground off all of the mild sheeting. There you can see the pattern. Pretty happy with that. I've drawn out the blade. It's a little bit narrower than I wanted, so it'll be a little bit narrower than this blade, but it'll also be about an inch longer because it'll be there. So that's cool. Let's cut it out on the bandsaw. So I couldn't cut it with the saw, so I ended up using the angle grinder. Now let's put some profile on it with the grinder.
I love this step because it's when the knife really starts coming alive and looking like something real. The blade was probably a 1/4 inch thick at this point, so I took it to the surface grinder and thinned it out. Like always on my Bowies, I'm putting in the false edge by hand with a filing guide. I've put some scribe lines on the blade so I know where the center is, so I can now start to grind my bevels.
So I've just finished grinding a small 3-inch knife and a 7-inch Bowie, both sides. And if you look at this belt, this is the incinerator belt, it looks brand new. I still see the top peaks on 90% of the abrasives. So that's incredible. It looks like I just pulled this one off the shelf. So guys, if you don't have these incinerator belts by Broadbeck, definitely go get some.
I've normalized the blade and also done a couple rounds of grain refinement. Now it's time to quench. After heat treat and temper, this blade ended up right at 60 HRC.
You better not drop that.
Don't worry, Molly, I won't. Now it's time to do the final grinding on this blade. I want to take this down nice and thin so it's got a really fine edge. Now it's time to work on the fittings. I'm actually using the Damascus that I distorted the first time, but I'm going to be twisting it, so it doesn't really matter. I'm drawing it out so it's about 3/4 of an inch thick and making it kind of cigar shaped so that it's easier to twist and you don't get any cold shuts. Now I'm just putting a flat area in each end so I have some place to put my twisting wrench. After giving it about 6 or 7 full twists, now I'm going to flatten it out. I actually went through this process twice because I needed a guard, a sub-hilt, a pommel, and a pommel nut. Now it's time to go back to the blade and put some shoulders in on the mill. I want the guard to sit nice and flat.
So I've sanded the blade to 220. You just watch me mill the shoulders here. Now it's time to work our way back. We've got guard, sub-hilt, pommel, and pommel nut. So we're going to be doing these one at a time, starting with the guard.
I've learned the hard way in the past. You need to sand your blade all the way up at least to 800 before you fit your guard. Because if you don't, you'll fit your guard and then sand the blade and then you'll have a gap. Hey folks, just a brief interlude here. Don't forget, this is a voting challenge. We need you guys to vote. Go check down in the description for the link where you can cast your vote for the best Bowie. Here we're putting the slot in the guard, getting ready to fit it up on the knife. I always like to hammer on the last 10% of the guard. First, I'll use some leather to protect it, and then I'll hammer it on and get a nice, perfect fit with no gap. Now it's time to put that profile into our guard. The guard is still flat at this point, so we're going to take it to the torch and bend it a little. This is the easiest way, and then you don't have to put the whole guard into the forge. The guard has a little curve to it, but we're going to grind the underside and give it a nice finger well. Now on to the sub-hilt. I've already put a slot in it. Now I'm doing the same thing and putting a little curve to it, but this time curving it the other way. Now I'm working on the pommel nut. I've got it chucked up in the lathe. I've removed a bunch of stock from it. Now I'm drilling the hole because I'm going to tap this later. Now I'm working on that little finial at the end of the pommel nut, which you're actually going to see. I'll be using two kinds of 1/4-20 taps here. If you're not familiar with taps, the bottom one is your standard tapered tap. The top one is a spiral tap. You need that when you're tapping a hole that bottoms out.
Okay, let's take a look at where we're at right now. So I've got the guard. It's just kind of soft fit on there, but it's on there. I've got the piece of wood for the spacer here. I've got the sub hilt slotted and a rough grind on it just so I know where the finger well is. And almost got the handle fit. And again, the handle looks like that with a pommel and the pommel nut. So I've got the hole drilled, which goes through. You guys can't see it, but it goes through. Next step, weld a piece of all thread on here at the right angle so that it goes through the hole, and then I can use my pommel nut. So let's get that all thread put on.
Now I'm using my little 45 jig to put the scallops in the top of the guard. A lot of people ask me about this. It's just for aesthetics. Because this Bowie is a takedown, I'm drilling holes in the sub hilt to put pins in, and that's going to line it up, the handle material on either side, to get a perfect fit every time.
So after drilling those holes, I just took some 1/8 inch rod and just sharpened the points and just put them in there, and then I put it on the knife and then just gave each of these a little tap, and that put a little indent exactly where that's going to go. So then I'm just going to drill these to accept these pins. Well, I got everything rough fit. It's starting to look like a knife. Now the long process of filing down all of the wood, because this is going to be a museum fit and it's a takedown, all of this wood has just got to be filed close and then sanded. The reason I don't do this on a grinder is one false move, and if the wood goes further than the fittings, you're screwed. So I like to do this with a file so I have a lot more control. Well, folks, I just pulled a bonehead move. I had just heat treated these and I figured I would put it back together, but I hadn't tempered them yet. And I forgot that I hadn't tempered it, and I cranked down on the pommel nut, and of course I pulled a chip out of it. So I gotta remake this one.
It's time to put my maker's mark in the blade. Nothing fancy here, just an old car battery charger, some salt water, and a stencil.
We get the blade sanded to 1000. We're ready for the final dip in the ferric chloride.
So why did I call this the Ice Blue Bowie? Because I'm going to hot blue all the fittings. This is niter blue that's melting in this pot. When it gets up to 640 degrees, we're going to immerse all the fittings and then pull them out after a minute or two.
Okay, folks, it's time to put it together. I've already got the guard hammered on carefully. Let's put the rest together.
There we go. I guess you want to see the blade. Let's go look at some glamour shots.
Thanks so much for joining me on this build. I had a fantastic time building this Bowie, but most of all, the relationship with all of these makers and all of these great guys, to talk with them, to chat with them, to see what they're doing and collaborate with them on this build. You guys only see the build, you don't see the fun we have behind the scenes. So thanks for joining me. Definitely go check out all the builds and make sure to vote. We'll see you on the next one.